Welcome to Heart of the Matter, the programme which is committed to telling you the truth about who must do what and why if the Palestine problem, the cancer at the heart of international affairs, is to be cured before it consumes us all. My guest this week is a member of the House of Lords, the unelected upper house of the British Parliament. Lady members of it have the title Baroness. My guest, Baroness Jenny Tonge, is a politician who paid a price for offending the Zionist lobby. Until 2004, she was an elected member of the House of Commons and the Liberal Democratic Party's front-bench spokesman on international affairs. She was sacked from that position when supporters of Israel, right or wrong, mobilized against her after she made a statement about suicide bombers. She is one of the very, very few in public life who will not be silenced by Zionist lobby pressures. May we dispense with protocol and formality, and can I call you Jenny on air?
Of course.
Now, I knew you'd say that, but
Absolutely.
But I've asked that question because it gives me an excuse to tell you and to tell viewers a fascinating but revealing short story about Golda Meir, Mother Israel, and Henry Kissinger, about why she didn't want to be on first-name terms with him. Shortly before she died, I had my last conversation with her, and I asked her how much really she had trusted Kissinger. And she gave me two answers. The first was a gesture with her fingers. She simply went until the fingers touched. And then she said, whenever Kissinger came to Israel, he'd slap my ministers on the back and call them by the first names, and they would call him by his first name. But not me, she said. I always called him either Mr. Secretary of State or Dr. Kissinger, and I insisted that he called me either Madam Prime Minister or Mrs. Mayor. There was a pause, and then in a gravel voice that could charm or intimidate American presidents, she said, if you're on first-name terms with a man like that, you'll get screwed.
Oh dear, I'm tempted to say you ought to call me Baroness.
Well, to use her words, Egypt's President Sadat didn't know that and got screwed. And one could say in a sense that you got screwed. You didn't get screwed for calling somebody inappropriately. You got sacked from your position in the House of Commons as your party's spokesman on international development for saying something about suicide bombers that caused the Zionist lobby to mobilize against you. So can we start by you talking me through what you actually said and why you said it?
Well, I was speaking at a meeting of the All-Party Group on Palestine in the House of Commons because the previous year I'd been to the West Bank and Gaza, and they just wanted to hear my impressions. And I was just giving my impressions, and really I had been horrified during that visit. I'd gone out with a totally, the famous balanced view, how everyone wants a two-state solution and there is fault on both sides, and etc. And I'd gone out with that balanced view, and I tried to maintain it as long as possible, but I think that at the first checkpoint I was made to feel so angry on behalf of our driver, who was totally humiliated in front of us. And then there were numerous episodes of humiliation and deprivation, and stories of people being unable to get any treatment, and really overall humiliation and lack of hope were the two things that I picked up there. And I said that, and I think I used the words, I'm saying this advisedly, that I began to think that if I'd been a Palestinian grandmother, which I'm not, but if I had been a Palestinian grandmother and I'd seen my children and grandchildren brought up in that situation with nothing ever getting any better, I might have considered becoming a suicide bomber myself. Now that to me was just an expression of knowing how hopeless they can be, and knowing how willful and idealistic and prone to new ideas young people can be. I thought, I can see how it happens. I can understand how they become suicide bombers.
Was it completely unreasonable for your critics to say that you were supporting suicide bombing and terrorism?
Well, it wasn't unreasonable, it was just ignorant. I think that people never look farther than the end of their noses when they see a terrorist act. Of course, the Palestinians call it freedom fighting. It's a very different thing for them. But in this country or in the States, people will see a terrorist act and they will say that is awful and wicked and cruel, and they condemn it. They don't ever say to themselves, why?
A part of the problem is that Israel defines all acts of Palestinian violence as terrorism. Now, effectively, that Israeli position is a denial of the fact that the Palestinians, like all occupied peoples, have the right to resist occupation by all means, including violence. Now, if when you made your statement, you had mentioned that, and perhaps added that Palestinian violence should be restricted to targeting the Israeli occupation forces, would that have made it less easy for the Zionists to target you?
I don't think so. I think they look for something to target and they go for it. In any case, I've said an awful lot in that particular speech about the unhappiness and the fear and the paranoia of the Israelis. I'd actually addressed that, and I'd empathised very much with Israelis and Jewish people from my own constituency who asked me to visit them while they were there. So I talked a lot about that, and I thought actually that I'd given a very balanced speech to the suffering of both sets of people, ordinary Israelis and ordinary Palestinians. But that wasn't touched upon.
Jenny, the odd thing is, if you had been an Israeli politician and said what you said in Israel, you wouldn't have had a problem, because Israeli politicians have complete freedom of speech. And let's just give one example. It wasn't too long ago that Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister, and as we speak, Israel's Minister of Defense, said, if I was a Palestinian, I would be a terrorist. Now, that was actually much stronger than what you said. You said you might consider becoming a suicide bomber. Now, in the light of that, isn't what happened to you some proof that the prime purpose of the Zionist lobby is to silence criticism of Israel and to prevent people like you even saying things that Israelis can say?
Alan, I didn't realise that at the time. But since I made those remarks in 2004, I have gone on a voyage of discovery into the activities of the Zionist, I call it the Israel lobby, but it is the Zionist lobby, in this country and in America. I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea of the power and the passion behind it. And I'm glad I made those remarks, because it introduced me to a whole aspect of Western life that I didn't know existed, and I do now, and it's very troubling.
Would it be true to say that almost all Western politicians are not frightened, terrified of offending Zionism?
I wouldn't say terrified. But I think they know that the consequences are that their political career will stall in some way if they offend the Zionists. And I don't think it's terror, because I think they've got